Automation has become a very important skill in IT because our deployment and development processes get more and more complex, and nowadays almost everything needs to be automated somehow. And Ansible has become a very useful tool to automate IT infrastructure and applications. It has become very popular, especially in enterprise environments. And in this video we're gonna talk about Ansible. I will explain how it works and how you can easily install and use that in your own environment, and how you can provision and maintain your Linux servers and keep them updated. So if you want to know all that and get started with automation on Linux, keep watching. Hi everybody, my name is Christian and welcome to the Digital Life, the right place for you to start your IT career, achieve new skills and learn how to become a real IT professional. I always make great tutorials, free training courses and give some IT career tips. I also do a lot live streaming on YouTube and Twitch, so if you just want to come around and ask me any questions, you can do that. And if that sounds all amazing to you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Ansible is an open source automation software that is now developed and maintained by Red Hat. Well, if you don't know who Red Hat is, that's the world's leading provider for open source enterprise solutions. And they also have their own Linux distribution, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and they also have the community project CentOS. So that is a very important player in the IT industry. One major concept of Ansible is that it works completely agentless over SSH. And that is very interesting because you don't need to install any agents beforehand on Linux or machines you want to control with Ansible. And because it uses SSH, it's supported by almost every modern IT device. So that means you can easily install, remove or update any software packages on Linux servers. You can configure different system services like web servers, manage users, accounts and so on. So that is very powerful. Ansible has a lot of these different modules, and we will have also a look at some very useful examples how you could use Ansible to provision and maintain your Linux servers. So because of all these reasons, Ansible has become a very popular tool and it is widely adopted by any size of company. And it is very likely, if you work in a systems engineer role or DevOps role, that you will need to know some Ansible skills and will need to work with Ansible in your day-to-day job. So therefore, let's step right into it. I will show you how you can easily install Ansible on your Linux machine. So that can be a virtual computer, you can install Linux on your hardware or also use that in Windows subsystem for Linux. It really doesn't matter. And then we will have a look at how to configure some Linux servers. I already have installed 3 Ubuntu servers. They are completely fresh installed. I didn't configure anything on these servers, and we will use Ansible to provision some software, and I will also come up with some great examples how you could extend those scripts and use that in your own personal environment, or if you're working in a company, how you could integrate Ansible in your IT infrastructure. So let's go. If you want to install Ansible on your Linux machine, you first should go to the docs.ansible.com. I will put your link in the description below. And then you can go to installation. On the installation page you will find instructions for almost all modern Linux distributions that are commonly used, so you can also install that on your Arch Linux or Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, CentOS, whatever you're using. So in my case I'm using that in Windows subsystem for Linux on Ubuntu. So that will first update the package sources, install some prerequisite packages, add the repository of Ansible, and then it finally will install it on your machine. If you have installed Ansible on your machine, we now need to create some configuration files. So you could also edit those default configuration files in the etc. Ansible folder, but I will show you a different method because I want to use it project-wise. So I will create a new folder that is called Ansible test and cd into that folder. Now we need to create the default ansible.cfg file that will override the default settings in the etc. file. So to do that, we will start creating a new file, ansible.cfg, and we will start with the default section. So that will override the default settings, and we can define different variables for our project here. So we first need to define an inventory file, and you could use any file name in here, but I will just use the inventory and name it like this because this is easier. Let's exit this and create the inventory file. Now we can create a list of all IP addresses of all the servers we want to control with Ansible. Now I will just enter the IP addresses of all 3 different servers I have just created. But you could also create groups of these different servers, and I will show you that because this is very interesting. So we can create a group for the master server, so that is the first IP address, and I also want to create a group that is called nodes for the 2 other IP addresses here. Now we have created the basic configuration files for Ansible, and we now need to think about how we authenticate to these 3 different servers, because as I said, Ansible is using SSH, and there are 2 common methods how you could authenticate via SSH to a remote computer, that is via username and password and via private and public keys. So username and password probably is not the best and most secure way, and I would strongly recommend if you use Ansible in any production environment, you should use the second method with SSH, private and public keys. But I will first show you the easy method with username and password. And before we do that, we need to disable the host key checking, and this is done by an entry in the ansible.cfg file. After that, we will need to enter all credentials to all different servers, and if you're using the same credentials on all 3 different servers, this is pretty easy because you could then just enter them in the ansible.cfg file. But in my case, I don't use the same username and password on all those 3 different servers, so I need to specify them in the inventory file. But let us start with configuring the ansible.cfg file and disable the host key checking. If we have done that, we can now close this file and then open the inventory file to add our credentials for every single server group. To do that, you can just extend this group here and just enter master column vars. And now you need to specify or can specify all different variables that should only apply to this server. So I will start with Ansible SSH user equal, and this server uses the master user and a password that is also master. And the nodes group that uses Ansible SSH user equal Christian and also the password Christian. Okay, let's write and exit this file. And we should now test if we can connect to all 3 different servers. To do that, we will use a simple Ansible command. So we will start with Ansible, and now we need to select a pattern. A pattern is a group of servers we have configured in the inventory file. So we could just test the master server with the master or the nodes. But you could also enter all if you want to test all servers that are included in the configuration file. And now we need to call a module with a -m parameter. As I said, Ansible has a variety of different modules that can configure system services, applications, and much more. We will have a look at these modules later. Now we will just use a simple module to test the connection, and this is called ping. Note, this is not a simple ping command like you would execute on a Linux console. This is an Ansible module that will authenticate via SSH and test if Ansible can use their credentials to configure those different servers. If we hit enter, Ansible will automatically check if there is a configuration and inventory file and use these settings we have just predefined. And you can see it tested all 3 different servers and it was successful. Let's also do something different because I just want to check the Ubuntu release on the nodes, for example. So let's do a quick example. If we call Ansible on the nodes group with the module shell, and the argument is basically the shell command we would just want to execute on the machine. So we could just use an lsb release-a and just hit enter. So as you can see, this is not executed on all 3 different servers, just on the nodes, and that will get us the output of this lsb release-a command here. So in this case, we can just see there are no lsb modules available for installing, and we are using Ubuntu 20.04.1 LTS. Okay, so the Ansible command is very helpful to just execute some shell commands or test the connection, but if we want to define more complex workflows or if we want to provision a machine with more complex tasks, we need something more sophisticated. And therefore we have the Ansible playbooks. And the Ansible playbooks are basically just simple YAML configuration files that are easy readable for humans but also interpreted by the Ansible commands. And then we can define more complex workflows like installing or removing applications, perform some configuration tasks and so on. So let's start with creating a simple Ansible playbook that will install some applications on our servers. So let's do that. Let's create a new file and we'll just name this install_nettools, for example, because I want this module to install the nettools application. And we can start this with 3 hyphens. Well, I actually don't know why this is, but it is shown in the Ansible documentation and I will just follow the official documentation here. And now we need to define on which hosts this Ansible playbook should apply on. So let's just assume we want to install that nettools only on the master node. Then we enter master here. And to install any application, we need to become the root user. So we will need become, yes. So this is only needed if you need Ansible to execute a sudo command, if you want to install or remove any applications or perform tasks where Ansible need root users privileges. And then we can define our different tasks. So a task always starts with a name. So enter name and you can define a custom name. So for example, install nettools. And then we need to call a module. And let's just have a look at the documentation of Ansible so we can check all different modules. Go to the homepage and just click on Ansible documentation. And then you can explore the documentation for any specific modules, or you could also search for something. So let's search for apt because I want to install applications. And there you can find, oh, there's a module that manages apt packages. Just click on that. And I absolutely love the documentation of Ansible because this is very well documented. So you have a general section where we have the syntax, the requirements and all the different parameters that can be used. We also have the default settings and some examples and explanation on these commands. And if you scroll down, you also can see some examples in the Ansible playbooks. So this, for example, will install the Apache HTTP server. State present is optional because state present is the default. You can see it here. So if you want to install an application, we don't need to specify that. We only need to specify the name of our application. So let's just minimize this and go back to our playbook. So we need to call the module apt and just name the module nettools. Okay, let's write and exit this file and test it. To execute a playbook, you need to execute another command than the Ansible command. So it is called ansible-playbook. One thing that is special when you need to become the root user is, let's just try to enter this. So this probably won't work because we are missing the sudo password. So we now could just enter the sudo password in the Ansible inventory configuration file and add this. But if you don't want to do that, you could also use a parameter, a capital K, that will ask you to enter the sudo password before that. So let's just enter the master password. Let's execute this again. So this will now check if the program nettools is already installed, and if it's not installed, it will try to do that. And we can see that it has changed something. Let's also do that again. So if we execute the same command again, enter the sudo password, you can see it should not change something. You can see it here, changed 0, because we have already installed the nettools and it doesn't need to do that again. So let's say we just want to remove the nettools on the master, but install that on all the different nodes. Let's do that. So we can just edit our inventory file. And I now need to change the state to absent. So as we can refer to the documentation, the absent state will remove a package. Okay, let's start with a new section because I want to install that on the nodes and remove it on the master. We also need to become the sudo root user, tasks, name, install nettools. Oh, I should change this here. Apt name nettools state present. So I don't need to specify that, this is just optional, but well, I just do it to make this simple. Okay, let's try to execute this. And you will notice we now have a problem, because the nodes have a different password than the master. So if I just enter the password master, it probably will work on the master, but it will fail on the nodes because they are not using the same password. And you can see this is the incorrect sudo password. So what we now could do is we could now specify the sudo password in the inventory file for all different servers. So let's edit our inventory file again. And let's add a section ansible become pass as master. And here it is ansible become pass Christian. Let's save and exit this, and let's try to execute our playbook again. No, we need to remove the K because I don't want to be asked for the password anymore. And you can see it's now working. Well, it hasn't changed something on the master node because that was successful before, but it has installed the nettools on those two different nodes. If you don't want to enter a password or you don't want to specify it in static configuration files, you need to come up with a more reliable and secure solution you could use in any production environment. So there are two different solutions. The first, as I said, is via SSH private and public keys, but then you also have the problem with the become password. So in this case, you should just change the vsudo file that you are able to execute any sudo commands without a password prompt, and you could just use the SSH private and public key to authenticate to those servers. By the way, if you don't know how to create a corresponding SSH private key pair and you don't know anything about how to authenticate via private and public keys remotely on Linux machines, I've likely made a video about this. So just go and check out this video, then I will teach you how to create a private and public key, how to upload this on a server. But you could also use the Ansible Vault, which is a secure method to store those credentials. So if you want to learn more about this, you could just have a look at the documentation of Ansible Vault on the Ansible homepage. But I want to show you the method with private and public keys. But we first need to change the sudo file that we are able to execute any sudo commands without any password prompt. Well, we could just connect to all three different servers and do that and upload the private and public key, but well, as we have Ansible, why shouldn't we do that with Ansible? So let's have a look at this. So let's just go to the Ansible documentation and let's search for authorized keys. And well, we have a section that is called authorized keys, so that can be used to add and remove SSH authorized keys for particular user accounts. So this sounds exactly what we need. One thing you should notice is this is a plugin and part of a POSIX collection, so you need to install this via this command here, Ansible Galaxy, though this can be used to install any additional plugins you will need to use when you want to extend the Ansible functionality. Okay, let's now copy our playbook, install nettools to add public keys YAML. And let's start changing this. So we don't need these three lines here, and we also don't need these three lines here. And we will change this here to install public keys. And we also change this here. Okay. So now we need to call the extension module we have just installed, ansible.posix.authorized-key. And we want to upload a public key for the user master. State is present. And now we need to look up the public key on my local machine. So we just type in what is mentioned in the official documentation file, comma, and that should be in my home folder, Ansible ID RSA pub. So I already have created a corresponding private and public key pair. As I said, if you don't know how to do that, just check out my other video about private and public key SSH authentication. Put your link in the description below, of course. Okay, let's just copy this here and place this at the end of this file. But we also need to change the user to Christian. Okay, so that now should work. Let's try to execute this and see if it's working. So it worked, great. So it has uploaded the public key for Ansible on all three different machines. Now it gets really exciting because we want to remove the password prompt for any sudo commands. And let's just do that with Ansible again. So how should we do that? Well, there's one particular file where we need to change one specific line, and I just want to show you that. Just open a new window and SSH to the master node. So this is changed in the etc. sudoers file. And if we have a look at this file, you can see there is allow members of group sudo to execute any command. And we need to change this line here so we have no password prompt. So how should we do that? Well, let's just close this window here. And let's add a new task in our add public keys playbook. So now we need a new task. We need the task change sudoers file. And how we should do that, let's just have a look at the Ansible documentation. So there is one particular module that is called line in file if you want to edit text in a file. Let's just open this documentation. So you don't need to install any extension to use this module. And if we scroll down below, we have some exciting examples. So this will change some interesting things in files. And we will simply use this pattern here to write our command. Well, there's something. Validate the sudoers file before saving. So we will just use this here. And change this a bit to whatever we need. So let's just paste this and we will just remove this here. So we want Ansible to make sure that a specific entry is present in the file. And we need to change the regular expression. By the way, if you want to learn about that, I probably will make a video about regular expressions. So you can just leave me a comment if you're interested in learning that. So that probably should be also very useful. So if we go back to our file, we want this line here to be changed. So we search for this regular expression here, sudo. We will need to change this line here to sudo all no pass wd colon all. So if we change this line to this here on all three different servers, Ansible should be able to execute any sudo commands without a password prompt. So I made a mistake here, so that you need to be careful that you will need to use the correct spaces here, otherwise Ansible won't work correctly. Then we will need to copy this here and also make this change on our other servers. Okay, let's write this. So now we can just execute the same playbook again because we have already uploaded the public key, so Ansible shouldn't do that again. But it should execute the other task we have just added. Okay, now we can have a look at the master node. Let's just open this file again and you can see Ansible has changed our file. So that's great. We can now use a private and public key authentication in Ansible. How we would do that? Well, we will first need to remove the host key checking because we don't need it anymore. This is only needed for username and password authentication. And we can just remove this line here and this line here. So now we need to specify which private key Ansible should use to authenticate. And we do this via Ansible SSH private key file. That is in my personal folder .sh ansible _id_rsa. So we can just copy this line here and we need to add it here as well. Write and exit this file. And now let's try to execute a simple ping command if we are able to ping all machines with the new SSH key authentication. Let's try this. We can also try to execute a playbook again because this will need Ansible to become a root user. And this is also working. Note it hasn't changed anything because all these changes are made before. So I hope this was helpful to you. I'm pretty excited about this and I absolutely love Ansible because it is very easy and you could also extend that. You can do so many useful things with it and I think that is absolutely an amazing software. By the way, if you want to have a look at different Ansible playbooks and you just want to have a look at some examples or want to have some boilerplates where you can just customize and use this in your own environment, Well, just follow me on GitHub, because I have created a GitHub repository where I upload all these example playbooks. I can also encourage you to write your own playbooks, and you can also do a merge request on those GitHub repositories if you just want to share your own playbooks with me, and I think that is pretty useful. We can use this as a community to share all the different boilerplates and playbooks and customize this in our own environment. So I think this is pretty useful. Just have a look at my GitHub page. I've put you a link in the description below. And also don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more about Ansible. Well, there are so many things we could do about this, and I also will make a video about the integration with Vagrant, so that will also be pretty interesting. So if you want to see once this video is uploaded, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. So before I go, I need to thank Mason, who is the producer of this show, and all my other supporters on Patreon. Without you, the community, this project wouldn't be possible at all. So thanks everybody for watching, enjoy the rest of your day, take care of yourself, and I see you soon.